I'm often asked about the nature of suffering. Suffering is the nature of the world. The world as it appears to us is a dance of shadows, light and dark. A dance of polarities, high and low, black and white, pleasure and pain. A leela, a divine play of yin and yang, inwards and outwards. And this contrast enriches our human experience. And the mind, the egoic mind, the small mind, follows this movement from one polarity to another, gives attention and becomes identified with the extreme or opposite ends of that continuum, believing itself to be one end of the polarity or the other, believing itself to own or to have one end of that continuum or another. It believes itself to be good or bad. It believes itself to be high or low. It believes itself to have love or not have love. Believes itself to be successful or a failure, and so on. So this is a case of mistaken identity and false ownership. Yet all of this is the divine play of which the mind is also an expression. As everything comes into manifestation as the world, it comes into duality, it is born into duality. And there is suffering because of the attachment to either this or that, the identification with either this or that, the attempt to own either this or that. When there is not, there is suffering. Because there is a wanting of what is not. And when there is suffering, because there is a fear of loss of what is believed to be owned. So suffering is woven into the rich tapestry of our human experience. And then there's the attempt in being spiritual to transcend suffering, to go beyond suffering, to enter some rarefied state where there is no suffering. But this attempt is another case of mistaken identity. And it's really just an avoidance or a denial of that which is deemed to be painful or unspiritual or unwanted or the cause of suffering. But suffering itself, not the circumstances of suffering, not the details of suffering, not the event of suffering, not the story of your suffering, but the experience within that suffering is the very doorway into a place, a space, a dimension that is beyond the dance of polarity, that is beyond duality. The experience of suffering, the experience within suffering, is the very doorway that is inviting you into true transcendence, not a transcendence that has anything to do with avoidance, but true transcendence, to transcend, to end the trance, to transcend, to transmute, to transform. Not to avoid suffering or deny suffering. It is a fact of the human experience. We see that in our own lives, and we see that in the news of the world. To truly transcend is not to avoid or deny or turn away from. It's not to become immune to the human experience. It's to open to your honest and raw experience within that suffering, so-called state of suffering that has been brought on by a situation or an event or a feeling or an emotion. To open to that, to allow it to be the doorway through which you fall into a dimension that we might call the non-dual heart. It's a wide open space where there is no protection or defense. It's beyond belief, it's beyond thought, it's beyond feeling. It's beyond spiritual concept. The non-dual heart is like a furnace, a fire that burns so brightly that everything that is false is consumed in this fire. The suffering is not created by the circumstance itself. It's created by the thoughts and feelings and beliefs and defenses and armoring and contortions that wrap themselves around the raw experience of suffering. When all this is given up into the fire, it is consumed and transformed into the light of awakeness. Neem Karoli Baba said, "I love suffering, it brings me closer to God." I love suffering. Not I love the situation, not I love the circumstance, not I love pain, not I love my story of being a victim. But I love this human experience that is enriched by contrast and invites me into a deeper dimension of being, which invites me to open and see that everything that arises in my experience through this experience called suffering, everything that arises in that, what arises in that? Your fears, your sense of being a victim, blame on what happened in the past that now brings on this suffering, unworthiness, a sense of being punished, belief that this shouldn't be happening, and so on and so forth. Suffering invites you to bring all that, to allow all that to the surface, and then to throw it into the fire. Because none of it is real. So to love suffering is to open and open and open and open. To love suffering is to be like a bowl without edges. To be like the sky without limits. To be the untainted, unadulterated, wide open space. Without owning or claiming that which arises, that appears within that wide open space. To love is like being a mother. Okay, it's to be a mother. A mother is crazy if she tries to own her child. It does not belong to her, whether that child is being born in the womb, is growing in the womb, or whether it has already been birthed. A mother's true nature is to open and allow, to allow the birth of new life without owning it, or controlling it, or possessing it, or claiming it as herself. To love is to be open, as the selfless mother that gives space for something new to emerge, whether that is a new form or a new consciousness. A mother is both empty and full. A bowl is both empty and full. The sky is both empty and full. Empty as the unconditioned open space, and full because it receives and allows everything to pass through. To love is also to be fully present. To be rooted. To be rooted here, in this, as this experience unfolds and unfolds and unfolds. It's to be unwavering, like a samurai warrior, poised on the edge of now, and now, and now. Poised with the sword of awareness, to cut down all that is false. Just like Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree and all the Maras came, yeah, and appeared to be real. The Maras of his thoughts, his feelings, his beliefs, his desires, his passions, his highs, his lows, his pain, his pleasure, everything comes tumbling in when you sit posed right here, unwavering, neither attempting to run away from nor trying to run towards, to claim possession of. Just here. And in this here-ness, all the Maras, all the false manifestations of this and that have a story of you in it. I like, I dislike. I want, I don't want. I am this or I am that. And everything that upholds that illusion, based on your past memory, experience, your life, your history, all of it can be used as evidence to uphold what appears as your sense of rightness or your sense of selfness, your sense of surety that you don't want this, but you do want that, that you don't like this, but you do like that, that this is good and that is bad. These are the Maras. To be open as love, to be present as love, is to allow all of that to be thrown into the fire, to be consumed, to be transformed. It's the crucifixion. Crucifixion on the cross of duality, in which there is a rebirth into the light of being, into the light of awakeness. And then suffering is seen not as a punishment, not as something that's gone wrong, neither as something to create another drama out of, or another sense of self as victim out of. It's very seductive to be a victim. But suffering suffering is seen to be in the face of the beloved. The face of the beloved that calls you closer so that you can know yourself as that, so that you can know yourself as the beloved, so that you can know yourself as God. Not God as another form or another entity or a transcendent being, but God as the wide open space that is your essential nature. And then suffering is no longer suffering as the mind perceives it. Wherever we experience suffering in our lives, whether it's on a small scale or a big scale, a minor loss or a big tragedy, it's always a calling, an invitation, whether it comes through physical pain, or the end of a relationship, or the loss of a cherished dream. It's always an invitation, a clearinghouse. It's here, not because you've done something wrong, not because life has done something wrong. It's here because there is something in you that wants to rise to the surface of consciousness, of awareness, to come into your field of experience. Because it's time for it to fall into the fire and be transmuted into love. Whatever has been avoided, whether it's a belief about yourself, about your history, about the story of your life, that keeps you in separation, that keeps you divided from love, from wholeness. If it has been avoided or suppressed, at some point it emerges. Because that's the nature of love, to bring everything to the surface in order to be seen and to be healed. Not to be fixed, necessarily. Not to be fixed, but to be healed in the non-dual heart, in the wide open space that doesn't put up a defense, that doesn't recoil or run away from the very experience that is appearing. I love suffering because it brings me closer to God. It brings you closer to the realization of who you truly are. It brings you closer to your Buddha nature. That which is untouched and untainted and invulnerable to change. Untouched, untainted, and invulnerable to the dance of light and dark, good and bad, up and down, high and low, pain and pleasure, gain and loss, success and failure. There is often such avoidance. In spiritual inquiry about the nature of suffering. So often it's seen to be an illusion. And yes, the victim of suffering is an illusion. There is no victim because the whole world, the whole divine play is expressed through you. You are not a victim of the divine play. You are not a victim of the world. You are the world. You are the open space through which the world appears as your experience of the world. So the crucifixion is the death of the victim. And to give up the victim sounds like what we want to do. Well, of course, we don't want to be a victim. But if you're ruthlessly honest, are you willing to give up your belief in being the victim when something really apparently bad happens? It's a sacrifice. And a radical sacrifice. To go all the way where the victim is seen as non-existent. The whole concept collapses in on itself. And all that's left is love. Not necessarily love of the world, not love of suffering, not love of anything, but love without reason, without object. In love, object and subject collapse in on each other. They fall into each other until there is only oneness. There is no separation in that. There is no opposite to love. When there is love of an object, then there is an opposite. But when there is love without object, there is no contrast, there is no comparison, there is no other. You have become the beloved. And then the beloved is seen everywhere. Everything that is seen, everything that appears in your experience, everything that appears in your world, as your world, is an expression of the beloved. And yet you are not separate from that.